I believe most of us are pretty familiar with the contents of Judges chapter number 7. We've been reading every chapter each Wednesday night, but because of the familiarity and also for time's sake, we'll not read the entire chapter at once, but we are going to look at the whole chapter tonight, and I hope this will be a help to you. We've been studying Gideon. We've been going through the book of Judges, and we've started in chapter 1, and we looked at when God told Judah to take that king and cut his thumbs and great toes off. And that sounds strange, but that man had done that to 70 other kings, and we preached on what goes around comes around. And the New Testament said that, be not deceived, God is not mocked. Whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. And so we preached on what goes around comes around. We got into chapter 2, and we got into our first judge, and his name was Othniel. His name meant the force of God, and he was the heritage leader. He was the nephew to Caleb, and he represented that long family line of faith, and so he was the heritage leader. And then next was Ehud. He was the handy leader. He was that left-handed man that had a dagger, and he stabbed Eglon in a very, very gross way. But it was an interesting story. Then there was Shamgar, and Shamgar took an ox goad and slew 600 men, and he was the heroic leader. And though that would become a trend in the Old Testament, and there would be many men that would fight small armies all by themselves, no one had ever done that before, and Shamgar had to do something unheard of and had to step way outside the box and step out on faith and fight a fight that no one had done before, and so he had to do something heroic. Then there was Deborah, the one and only female judge, and she was the humble leader. And you'll recall she told Barak, the general, to take them into war, but that God would deliver Sisera into the hand of a woman. And when you're reading the text, you would think that it's going to be her, but it wasn't her. It was Jael, and she wasn't mad that she wasn't the woman. She was just glad to be a part. And the next chapter, she gave that great song of praise to God, full of prophecy and history and a lot of great things. But the point was that she was humble. She didn't have to be the woman. She could just be a woman. And we use that to go both directions, because sometimes many men have to be the man, or they don't want to be involved at all, which is a problem. But humility. Then we came in to study Gideon, and when we find Gideon, he is hiding, threshing wheat. He's trying to hide his grain from the Midianites, and he is the hiding leader. I'm trying to give you these in a alliterated outline to keep track of them, and that way you can remember them. But anyway, we looked at Judges chapter 6 last week, and we looked at Gideon. And I want to start tonight in chapter number 7. We'll just read 3 verses to get going tonight. If you're there, say amen. Judges 7, verse 1, Then Jerubbaal, who was Gideon, and all the people that were with him, rose up early and pitched beside the well of Herod, so that the host of the Midianites were on the north side of them, by the hill of Moreh in the valley. Now, if you'll recall, in Judges 6, Israel had again departed from God. They dove headfirst into idolatry and blasphemy, and then God turned the Midianites on them, and it got so bad that the children of Israel were living in dens and caves out in the mountains, and the Bible said that they were greatly impoverished. And the Midianites would come in, and whenever they would have a harvest, they would destroy it. And they would destroy their farms, and they would destroy their gardens and their produce, and they were destroying their way of survival. And so Israel's in a bad way. And God has raised up Gideon to lead them into battle, and Gideon has sent out messengers to gather in some troops. And so by 7:1, now he has troops, and they're all gathered together. Verse number 2, please. And the Lord said unto Gideon, The people that are with thee are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hands, lest Israel vaunt themselves against me, saying, Mine own hand hath saved me. Now therefore go to, proclaim in the ears of the people, saying, Whosoever is fearful and afraid, let him return and depart early from Mount Gilead. And there returned of the people 22,000, and there remained 10,000. Tonight, out of this chapter, I do want to preach on this simple thought: pride prevention. Pride prevention. As God has raised up the leader, Gideon, and Gideon has sent out and gathered in troops, 32,000 of them, which compared to Midian, the 135,000 they had, was, they were vastly outnumbered, but nonetheless, 32,000 was the military force that Gideon was able to get together. And God said, "You got too many people." He said, the people that are with thee are too many. He said, because if I give the Midianites into their hands, they will vaunt themselves against me, saying, "Mine own hand hath saved me." And He knows the hearts of His people, doesn't He? And even though they were greatly impoverished and living in dens and caves and having to hide their harvests, and they would still be more impressed with their own involvement than God's. And they would be more impressed with what they did and how hard they tried than God's mercy and God's power and God's intervention. And so God has to thin the herd. 32,000 was just too many. And it didn't take a whole lot to make 22,000 of them go home. Verse number 2, the people that are with thee, they're too many. In verse number 3, he said, "Go to, proclaim in the ears of the people, whosoever is fearful and afraid, let him return and depart early from Mount Gilead." He said, just whoever's afraid, you can leave. Nobody has to stay. You can go. And 22,000 of them packed their bags and walked out the door. And God said that He was afraid that they would vaunt themselves against me. That's what He says in verse number 2. He said, "I'm afraid that they're going to vaunt themselves against me." The word for vaunt themselves, it means to embellish. It means to boast in explaining. It means to beautify. Now, some people will call that preaching. I don't know. It means to embellish. It means to boast in explaining. It means to beautify, to go over the bows, to glorify. God said, if I use what you've got, your people, they're going to vaunt themselves against me. They're going to think they did this. Even though 32, they're vastly outnumbered, but even still, their pride is so toxic and so strong and so deceitful that they will believe that they don't need me. And it is such a travesty when people who need God vaunt themselves, beat their chests that house their prideful hearts instead of giving God the glory. So God does a little pride prevention. He says, let's shrink it down. And so in verse number 3, it says, "Now therefore go to, proclaim in the ears of the people, saying, whosoever is fearful and afraid, let him return and depart early from Mount Gilead. And there returned of the people 22,000. Man, that's a big split. It's a lot of folks to walk out. And Gideon is learning that everyone's not as committed to the cause as he thought. So in this first section, I want to look at the first part of the slackers. The slackers. We're going to call that group of 22,000 that left, we're going to call them slackers. Y'all all right with that term? Is that appropriate enough? I don't want to sound too offensive. I did try to make it as least offensive as possible, but it was just the best one I could come up with. The slackers. And you would at first give them a point for coming. At least they're there. But God said, yeah, they're there, but they're so full of pride, I'd rather them just not be there. I would rather do extra miracles instead of use them because they're so prideful. And Gideon, all he has to say is whoever wants to leave can leave. Whoever is afraid, they can leave. And these men flee. Now, there was a period of time in our American history when people would dodge the draft. And no one's ever said anything positive about any man that dodged the draft. All right, you call them slackers, we call them bums. I hope no one in here dodged the draft, but no one ever really looked kindly toward that. And these men were literally willing to leave and let 1/3 of the military force fight on their behalf while they went home. Okay, that is a slacker. All right, you fight the battle for me, I'm leaving because I'm afraid. That is a slacker. It's like that old fable about the chicken and the pig and the breakfast. Y'all heard that? About the bacon and egg breakfast? You say, what's the difference between the chicken and the pig in that breakfast? Well, the chicken was involved. The pig was committed. The chicken was involved, but the pig was committed. And Gideon is learning very quickly that everyone's not as committed to this as I thought they were. And as Gideon steps up to say, whoever's fearful, you can leave, I wonder how many he thought were actually going to leave. Did you think he thought 22,000? I don't think he thought 22,000. Maybe 100. Of all these valiant men, maybe 100 are really scaredy cats. No. 22,000. That'd be hard to watch that walk away. Really? Y'all all going to leave us? And it seems like God is making Gideon's job even harder. But in reality, God is really helping him. When you're in a battle of faith, you need faithful people. You don't need people that are just there for the show. You'll remember when David was sent down to the battle where Goliath was, his brothers said, we know the naughtiness of your heart, you're just here to see this. Okay, when you're in a battle of faith, you don't need people that are just there to see it. All right, you need people of faith standing next to you. All right, God is going to send, if you know this story, God is going to send this military out with nothing but trumpets and tea pitchers with lamps inside of them. All right, they're not going out there with, a tank. They're not going out there with this impressive weaponry. They're going out there with a trumpet and a tea pitcher and a lamp. All right, that don't sound like a great military plan. It just, all right. Now, we know what God does, but when you tell 32,000 people that we're all going to go do it this way, I wonder how many people would have bailed on him then. It's better to have the herd thin before the battle begins. You don't want to be swinging swords elbow to elbow and turn around and everyone's running away from you, including your own people. You don't want that. You don't want to be like Uriah the Hittite. Y'all remember Uriah and how he died? They said get in the hottest part of the battle and then leave him there. It's a bad way to go down. And so God is exposing the heart of these people, and it is a hard truth to accept. But in John chapter 15 and verse number 2, he said, every branch that beareth fruit, he purgeth it, that it may bring forth more fruit. And sometimes God has to purge in order to get more fruit. Sometimes he has to, there's some people that I'd rather not do this with you. And that's a very hard thing to accept coming out of the face of God. But God said these people need to go because they're going to mess this up with their pride. This isn't going to go well. And so he has to purge. Sometimes God wants to shrink things to make them useful. John the Baptist had to decrease so Jesus could what? Increase. Paul's ministry team shrunk multiple times to the point where only Luke is with me. He said, I have no man like-minded, only Luke is with me. John the Beloved was shrunk all the way down to isolation on the Isle of Patmos so that Jesus could come and give him the revelation. Sometimes less is more. But in Judges chapter 7, what we learn is that you can be removed from the equation and victory will still come. But if God is removed from the equation, doesn't matter how many people you can get, God, that victory is not coming. Now, God was willing, if you know the story, Gideon he winds up with only 300 men, and he takes 300 men and they break the pitchers with the lights in them and they blow the trumpets, and all the Midianites turn on each other. And then God gives a deliverance and they fight a big battle. And all the people that left, these 22,000, most of them actually get to come back and join in this battle after God has given them momentum. Now don't think a whole lot about that, because we're going to talk about that at the end. But they all come back once it looks like we're winning. Like, I'm not going to stay with you and have faith, but when it looks like you're doing good, I got your back, I'm with you. Like, I'm not going to come when there's only, 20-something people, but when you're full, I'll come. When it's impressive, I'll show up. And I got your back when you're doing real good. But when it takes faith, nah. All right, that's a slacker. That's a slacker. They showed back up when the momentum came. But anyway, God was going to grant deliverance to Israel, and He was extremely willing to give them that. But the praise of the deliverance He was going to keep for Himself. He was not going to share the glory. And He was even willing to shorten the means that He would have all of the glory. I'll read you what one writer said, an old preacher from a long time ago said this. He said, Christianity requires men. David's royal band of worthies was the type of the forces of the church, all valiant men and able to encounter with thousands. Doth but a foul word or a frown scare thee from Christ? Doth the loss of a little land or silver disquiet thee? Doth but the sight of the Midianites in the valley strike thee? Home then, home to the world. Thou art not for the conquering band of Christ. If thou canst not resolve to follow Him through infamy, prison, racks, gibbets, flames, depart to thine own house and save thy life to thy loss. Aren't you glad He's not your preacher? 22,000 up and walked away. They were the slackers. And we'll come back in a little bit. Let's look at verse number 3 again. Verse number 3 through 8. Now, at the very end, there remained 10,000. 10,000. We're going to call these men the stayers. This group of men are the stayers. Now, I want you to consider what has just happened in their life. They have been in bondage to Midianites for 7 years. They've lost their homes. They're living in a hole. They're living in a cave. They're living in dens. They lost their farm. They are greatly impoverished. Their life is a wreck. And then Gideon stands up and says, God told me to go fight the Midianites. Let's go. So they joined his force. They got there. They're getting ready to go. And God says, too many. And they watched 22,000 people quit, leaving only 10,000 to fight 130-something thousand people. And those guys stayed anyway. Those men just watched 22,000 people walk away, making their job impossibly difficult. Yet they stayed. That's the kind of men you want around you. That's the kind of people you want to build something with. That's the kind of people you want to work with. That's the kind of friends and believers that you want side by side or in your foxhole or in your trench. That's who you want to be fighting with and working with and praying with and laboring with. Those that are going to stay no matter how many people quit, no matter how many people walk away. And Gideon must be at the same time distressed and encouraged because he just watched 22,000 slackers walk away, but he's got 10,000 stayers that aren't leaving for anything. That is encouraging. That's the kind of men you need. And and we'll get to their division in a minute, but what a testimony that they stayed. These men were not committed to the crowd, they were committed to the cause. Are you committed to the cause, or are you just committed to the crowd? Are you in this thing for standing for God because that's what your immediate surroundings are doing? Well, are you going to do it if we quit? Are you in it for the cause, or are you in it for the crowd? Are you committed to the cause or to the crowd? So these 10,000, they stayed. But then God tells him that it is still too much, and he puts Gideon through the strangest exercise. If you'll look in verse number 4. The Lord said unto Gideon, the people are yet too many. Bring them down unto the water, and I will try them for thee. I will try them for thee there. If you mark in your Bible, I would ask you to underline that little line. I will try them for thee. He said, and it shall be that of whom I say unto thee, this shall go with thee, the same shall go with thee, and of whomsoever I say unto thee, this shall not go with thee, the same shall not go. So he brought down the people unto the water, and the Lord said unto Gideon, every one that lappeth of the water with his tongue, as a dog lappeth, him shalt thou set by himself. Likewise, every one that boweth down upon his knees to drink. And the number of them that lapped, putting their hand to their mouth, were 300 men. But all the rest of the people bowed down upon their knees to drink water. And the Lord said unto Gideon, by the 300 men that lapped will I save you, and deliver the Midianites into thine hand. And let all the other people go, every man unto his place. So God now shrinks the military force even further to just simply 300. Now God is definitely making Gideon's job harder. Another preacher said this. He said, this may help us to understand those providences which sometimes seem to weaken the church and its interests. Its friends are too many, too mighty, and too wise for God to work deliverance by. God has taken a course to lessen them, that he may be exalted in his own strength. And God has now taken Gideon's 10,000 that he was so excited to have, and now shrunk it to 300. And God says in verse number 4 that he will try them. Now, the term try them is usually used in Scripture to talk about metal, like gold, as in refining it. Like Job 23:10, when Job said, he knoweth the way that I take. When he hath tried me, I shall come forth as gold. And God is about to take Gideon's remnant and purge it again. And God says to him in verse number 4, I will try them for thee. God knew that Gideon could not make this call. At this point, Gideon is desperate. He's just watched 22,000 people leave. He's glad for every one of the 10,000 that he has. He doesn't want to lose a single one. All right? Now, I'm a Baptist pastor. I know what that feels like. And God says, I will try them for thee. You know, man looketh on the outward appearance, but God looketh on the heart. And so God is about to do what Gideon could not do. Pick. He's about to pick who's going home. Who's staying, who's leaving. He's about to pick. And through an undisclosed test, God reduces 10,000 to 300. This water drinking test it's kind of like one of those high IQ tests that someone puts you through that you don't know you're going through. Like, y'all have heard about Henry Ford's salt and pepper thing? When he was interviewing for an executive position, he would interview over a meal. And if the man being interviewed put salt and pepper on his food before he ever tasted it, he automatically disqualified that man. Because his words were, he's a poor decision maker. Because he hasn't tasted that yet. He didn't cook it. He didn't season it. He doesn't know how much salt's on those potatoes. He doesn't know how much pepper's on that steak. He just assumes he needs to add something to it. And he said, if you'll salt and pepper your food without testing it, he said, you'll probably won't test the product before putting it in production. And it was one of those little quirky tests. And as God sends all these men down to this water drinking exam, it's somewhat similar. And this water exam, it divided them into two groups. One that reached down with his hand and got water and lapped it out of his hand, and those that got all the way down on the ground and take a very long drink. Like you've probably done that out in the river or creek before. So it divided these men into two different groups, and that may not seem significant, but the latter was the getting on the ground and getting your head down in the water was one. It was very time consuming, and in ancient history was a wartime no-no, all right, because it was deemed very inconsiderate. Because those that would just get a sip and keep going, but those that would unload and get on the ground, they stopped all progress. And the forces and the troops would have to stop their march, and they would have to wait, and it was deemed very inconsiderate. And this taught Gideon who was high maintenance and who wasn't. It revealed who was willing to settle for a sip to keep progress going, and who was willing to stop the whole group for a long drink. Well, even in the ranks of the 10,000 stayers, there are many who are still looking out for number one, so to speak. And so the army shrinks again to simply 300. Well, at this point, God knows Gideon is about to lose his mind. Gideon is terrified. And so in verse number 9, if you'll look at this with me, verse number 9, it came to pass that the same night that the Lord said unto him, Arise, get thee down into the host, for I have delivered it into thine hand. But if thou fear to go, go thou with Phurah thy servant down to the host, and thou shalt hear what they say, and afterward shall thine hands be strengthened to go down unto the host. Then went he down with Phurah his servant unto the outside of the armed men that were in the host. And the Midianites and the Amalekites and all the children of the east lay along in the valley like grasshoppers for multitude. And their camels were without number as the sand by the seaside for multitude. And when Gideon was come, behold, there was a man that told a dream unto his fellow and said, Behold, I dreamed a dream. And lo, a cake of barley bread tumbled into the host of Midian, came unto a tent and smote it, that it fell, and overturned it, that the tent lay along. And his fellow answered and said, This is nothing else save the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel. For into his hand hath God delivered Midian and all the host. And it was so, when Gideon heard the telling of the dream and the interpretation thereof, that he worshipped and returned to the host of Israel and said, Arise, for the Lord hath delivered into your hand the host of Midian. And so God has revealed the heart of Gideon's men. Now he's revealed the heart of Gideon's enemy, and let Gideon know that they are more afraid than you are. They are more certain they're going to lose than you are. Because guess what? Midian probably didn't know that Gideon only had 300 men. God doesn't tell everybody everything. And so God allows Gideon to eavesdrop and overhear these people talking about how afraid they are and how certain they are that Gideon is going to prevail. Well, this builds courage into Gideon's heart and quiets his fears. And so in verse number 16, it says he divided the 300 men into three companies. He put a trumpet in every man's hand with empty pitchers and lamps within the pitchers. And he said unto them, Look on me and do likewise. And behold, when I come to the outside of the camp, it shall be that as I do, so shall ye do. When I blow with the trumpet, I and all that are with me, then blow ye the trumpets also on every side of all the camp, and say the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. So Gideon and the 100 men that were with him came unto the outside of the camp in the beginning of the middle watch, and they that had but newly set the watch, and they blew the trumpets, and brake the pitchers that were in their hands. And the three companies blew the trumpets, and brake the pitchers, and held the lamps in their left hands, and the trumpets in their right hands to blow withal. And they cried, The sword of the Lord and of Gideon. And they stood every man in his place round about the camp, and all the host ran and cried and fled. And the 300 blew the trumpets, and the Lord set every man's sword against his fellow, even throughout all the host. Verse 23, And the men of Israel gathered themselves together out of Naphtali, and out of Asher, and out of all Manasseh, and pursued after the Midianites. And Gideon sent messengers throughout all Mount Ephraim, saying, Come down against the Midianites, and take before them the waters of Bethbara and Jordan. Then all the men of Ephraim gathered themselves together, and took the waters of Bethbara and Jordan. And then verse 25, they take some princes of the Midianites and kill them. And so God has granted this victory. He has turned the Midianites against themselves. And then, once this battle starts, all these men that were not there now are coming back and coming to the battle. Some were probably there in the beginning, some maybe not. But now this battle, this army of 300 has now just exploded into a whole bunch of people. So why did God take them all away to just let them all come back? Because God needed some starters. That 300 men, they were the starters. They were the starters. They were the group that God was going to start something with. It was going to get big. This army, it's going to take off, and it's going to blow up, and it's going to be a big army, and they're going to conquer, and they're going to take the waters of Jordan. They're going to take the waters of Bethbara, and they're going to kill the princes, and they're going to bring in the Naphtali, and they're going to bring in Manasseh, and they're going to bring in Asher, and this army is going to get big, but it had to start small. God is resetting things. Israel has gotten far from what she was supposed to be, and God is resetting it. And when God resets something, He does it through small numbers. The multitude will come back, but God wanted a group of starters. A few reasons why I believe God wanted starters and why I still believe God does things this way, why God gets a group of starters. In verse number 17, here's the key. He said unto them, Look on me and do likewise. Behold, when I come to the outside of the camp, it shall be that as I do, so shall ye do. God gives Gideon, and Gideon gives them some very specific instruction, and it is absolutely necessary for everyone to be on the same page, to do the same thing, at the same time, the same exact way, and then to say the exact same thing. It was extremely important that the whole group be on the same page. So Gideon's 300, well, now it's a blessing, because if you've got to get 32,000 people on the same page, good luck. If you've got to get 10,000 people on the same page, if you've got to get 10,000 men who aren't afraid, all right, these guys are crazy. You've got to get 10,000 crazy men on the same page to do exactly what you say to do, exactly how, exactly when, all exactly together. Good luck. So God shrunk it down to 300. The chances of pride, again, have been prevented. God told Gideon, I don't need you to be strong. I need you to be the same. I don't need you to be big. I don't need you to be vast. I don't need you to be large and have a big army. I just need you to be the same. I need you to have unity. I need you to have followers. I need you to have unity and humility. I need you to have trust. I need to be able to trust. Gideon needs to be able to trust that when he says, do it like this, they're going to do it like that. And Gideon needs to be able to trust that when he divides them up and they go over there and they go over there and they go over there, that they're all still going to do the exact same thing like they planned. He needs unity. And God doesn't need bigger churches. God needs more unified churches. Rockmart doesn't need a mega church. You know what Rockmart needs? Rockmart needs a group of churches that are unified. Springdale Road doesn't need a mega church. It needs a church that's on the same page. A group of starters. I pray that we have starters, because starters are special people. They make special sacrifices that down the road no one will ever remember. That down the road people won't recognize. People that start things, they're special people. They're special people in the work of God. They're not often famous either. Only one of these people are named, and it was Gideon's servant Phurah. They weren't named, but the world has never forgotten what they did. A group of starters. You know what? I believe that God has given us a group of starters. People that can get in the trench together and love each other and have faith together when it looks impossible, when it looks insane, when people you know have already left? What are the odds that the 22,000 that left didn't leave friends there? How bad do you think that hurt? You're going to leave me? You're going to leave me to go home while I stay and fight? What if I die? We're fighting a giant army. I probably will die. And you're going to leave? I thought we were closer than that. You know that had to hurt. But God uses groups of starters. Kind of like the 12 disciples. Didn't that little group of 120? And boy, they started something, didn't they? The world thought they were crazy. But they started something. So God, when He resets a place, He does it through small numbers. He does it through unity. He does it through humility. And He knows where we're all standing. He knows our hearts. He knew of that 32,000 who He couldn't trust. Brother Williams said, I believe it was last Sunday in Sunday school, about David, that David handled his trials better than his successes. God knows who He can trust with success and who He can't. God knew He couldn't trust that 32,000. They're going to vaunt themselves against me. God even knew of the 10,000 who He couldn't trust. So He dwindled it down to 300, a small group of starters, and He got something amazing done. And I believe God still does it that way. I believe God has banded together a small group of starters here at our church, and I believe God has great plans. I believe that. And I appreciate every starter that has stuck and stayed and sacrificed to be a part of this ministry. Amen. Let's stand, bow our heads. If I could get the ladies to come back, let's play that song again. Let's sing that. I have decided to follow Jesus, no turning back. I know that song wasn't around back in Gideon's day, but should have been. I bet those 300 men would have loved that song. Brother Dylan, is that in the book? I have decided to follow Jesus. 116. Page 116 if you need a book. Let's sing that together. I have decided to follow Jesus. I have decided to follow Jesus. I have decided to follow Jesus. No turning back, no turning back. Verse number 2. Though none go with me, still I will follow. Though none go with me, still I will follow. Though none go with me, still I will follow. No turning back, no turning back. On the last. The world behind me, the cross before me. The world behind me, the cross before me. The world behind me, the cross before me. No turning back, no turning back. Amen. Ladies, y'all just keep on playing that. Shake someone's hand. Tell them I was glad to see them in church tonight. Consider yourself dismissed.